I bought the 6-foot driveway under their clubhouse and made them cross my land to reach their own homes. I left my ranch for 2 days and came home to find every acre locked behind a shiny steel fence marked Private HOA Property. They thought forged papers and cold metal could erase my name from my father's land. But I used to build dams. I know how pressure breaks. So I found the tiny strip of ground they forgot to buy. And I bought the only key to their gate. When I turned off County Road 317 and the tires of my old F-250 rolled onto the gravel lane, I knew something was wrong. The road sounded different, hollow, like echo inside a pipe instead of open pasture. A gust pushed through the mesquite and dragged a skin of dust across the hood, and when it cleared, I saw the color first. Flat factory gray where there had only ever been open air. Steel, a fence where no fence had been. I braked. The truck rocked once, the hitch clicked, and the afternoon quiet rushed back around the sound. Beyond the fence, my place lay exactly as I'd left it 2 days earlier. 40 acres of Texas hill country rolling in blonde grass, the windmill turning easy, the white roof of the barn throwing back sunlight. Every familiar thing sat inside the line like a photograph inside a frame. The new gate was powder-coated steel, square mesh, chain cinched tight around a post sunk in fresh concrete. A padlock big enough to moor a boat hung from the links. Zip-tied to the center was a bright white sign with block letters, Private HOA Property. Heat smelled like hot metal and cedar when I stepped out. Cicadas drilled the air. I put both hands on the mesh and gave it a shake. The chain bit the post and sang a short, ugly note. Dust lifted in a curtain and fell slow and indifferent. The gate didn't move. I followed the fence with my eyes. East, it ran past the mailbox that still read Morrison in stencil, then bent south and kept going, skirting live oaks like someone had measured with a tailor's tape. West, it traced the property edge until the line dissolved into the shimmer above the Calichet Road. They hadn't jumped my line. They had traced it from their side. Careful, deliberate. I stood and let the quiet fill. Cattle drowsed under the pecans. The barn's open door held a square of shadow. I could smell hay, close enough to hurt, far enough to stay out of reach. 2 days in Houston. That was all. I'd left before sunrise to take my mother to St. Luke's, listened to her say, "You don't owe the ranch your bones, Jacob." I watered troughs, stacked feed, told the barn cat I'd be back Saturday. I was back Saturday. This wasn't. There was a phone number in the corner of the sign. I took a photo and called. A pleasant, rehearsed voice answered, Pine Brook Meadows Homeowners Association. I explained the gate where no gate belonged. Keys clicked. "It appears your parcel lies within our new secure perimeter," she said. "For the safety of residents, access is temporarily restricted while compliance reviews visible structures." "Perimeter upgrade," I repeated, tasting dust. "Ma'am, I own the land on the other side of this fence." "We didn't touch your land, Mr. Morrison. We simply secured ours." The call ended with a reference number and the promise of an email that never arrived. I leaned my forehead against the mesh. It was warm as a skillet and printed little squares on my skin that faded as the breeze moved. I phoned the sheriff. Dispatch took the intersection and said a unit would swing by. 20 minutes later, a young deputy pulled up, nose sunburned under a ranger hat. He walked the line with me, crouched at a survey pin, brushed the cap with a knuckle. "They didn't step on you," he said. "They locked me out of me." He studied the sign. "I can't cut a lock that isn't on your property. If they interfere with water or feed, that's different." "Different how?" "Different I can act." He tipped his hat. "Sorry, sir." He left me a carbon copy that fluttered in the wind. The sun pulled long shadows across the gravel. I took stock. Cattle fine till dark, windmill spinning, generator full. I could sleep in town or on the bench seat. But waterwork taught me the mathematics of pressure. Push long enough in the right place and rock moves. Gates are answers, not arguments. I studied the corner where the new line curled around the mouth of my lane. Posts plumb, concrete pale, welds clean. I sat in the truck with the door open, one boot heel in the gravel, the smell of creosote from the old corner post mixing with hot oil and the faint mineral breath that always comes off the stock tank when the wind is south. From the glove box, I slid out a manila envelope. Tax bill, title, a photocopy of the deed whose metes and bounds once felt like a foreign language and now read like home. Beginning at a rebar set, thence north 41 degrees 12 minutes west, to a point in the center line of Willow Creek. Every bearing still pointed where it had always pointed. My father used to say the land is a slow talker, son. It won't shout. You have to hush to catch it. I hushed. The fence hummed as the wind played it like a dull instrument. A white SUV eased to a stop beyond the cattle guard and idled. The passenger window slid down an inch, then another. Afternoon, a smooth voice called. You must be Mr. Morrison. Depends who's asking. The board appreciates your patience while we complete our perimeter work. He said board like it wore a suit. We'll coordinate access when compliance has signed off on your structures. We're very big on harmony out here. Behind the tint, a smile hovered without eyes. The window slid back up. The SUV wheeled away, leaving a neat wake of dust that settled on my hood. I watched the road swallow it. I looked at the lock again, the careful concrete collar at each post. I thought of my mother's hand in the lemon clean room. I thought of the barn cat, unimpressed by bureaucracy. I thought of water and pressure, and how the smartest place to push is rarely the most obvious. The sign clicked against the mesh, steady, clock-like. Somewhere a cricket tuned up. Far off, thunder stacked itself on the horizon's lip, though the sky above stayed too blue for rain. I didn't kick. I didn't climb. I put the keys I did have back in my pocket and walked the line, slow and deliberate, tapping posts, counting spans, learning the rhythm of their work. At the angle where the posts tightened around the mouth of the lane, I knelt and brushed dirt until the survey pin shone like a coin. It was mine. That hadn't changed. I stood and let dust fall from my hands. The mesh printed a grid of shadow across my boots. Who would dare? I asked the empty road, not loud, just enough to hear the shape of it. Lock a man out of his own land? The wind moved and the fence gave the only answer it had, the truth of its steel and the name on its sign. I took a photo, squared and level, then turned toward town to find whoever decided a fence could tell me where my home begins and where it ends. The drive into town took 30 minutes, long enough for the anger to cool into something sharper. Dust chased me down County Road 9, curling in the mirror like smoke from a slow fire. The sky was that hard Texas blue that gives you no shade, no mercy. I stopped at the post office first. The clerk, a woman named Clara who'd known my father, handed me a thick bundle of mail held together with a rubber band. Halfway through the pile, I saw them. White envelopes with the same printed header, Pine Brook Meadows Homeowners Association. The words looked out of place against my rough hands, like city talk in a barn. The first letter began politely enough. Notice of property concern. By the third page, the politeness had rotted away into threats. Fines for non-compliant structures, aesthetic disharmony, and unapproved machinery visibility. They were talking about my barn and tractor. The same barn my father built in 1972, the same tractor that broke the drought years when we lived on beans and grit. The second envelope had photos, grainy shots taken from the road of my barn, my windmill, even my front porch. Someone had been standing on the shoulder snapping pictures through the fence. I felt that tight squeeze in my chest, the kind that comes right before you throw a punch or a prayer. At the bottom of one page was a signature I didn't recognize at first glance. Bethany Whitfield, President. The handwriting was careful, almost pretty. I folded the papers, slid them back into the envelope, and stepped outside. The sun hit the concrete, white and merciless. I called the number listed at the bottom. A cheerful voice answered, "Pinebrook Meadows HOA office, this is Lila." "Yeah, this is Jake Morrison," I said. "You all keep sending letters about my barn. You realize my ranch isn't part of your development?" There was a pause, the sound of keys clattering. "One moment, Mr. Morrison. I'm showing your property adjacent to the north perimeter of Pinebrook Meadows." "Adjacent," I repeated, meaning next to, not inside. "Well, the board has concerns about visible structures affecting community harmony. You might consider repainting." I hung up before she finished. Harmony. That word had no business out here. The diner across from the courthouse still smelled of burnt coffee and bacon grease. I found a stool at the counter. Sheriff McKay was nursing a refill 2 seats down. "Morning, Jake," he said. "Heard something about you getting fenced out." "Yeah. Turns out I've also been fined for owning my own barn." He raised an eyebrow. "HOA trouble?" "Pinebrook Meadows." He whistled. "Bethany Whitfield runs that one. Ex-developer's wife. Likes everything shiny." I stirred my coffee. "You think they've got a right to tell me what color my barn is?" "Not unless your deed says they do," he said. "But she's got friends in zoning. Watch your back." By late afternoon, I was back on my property. The light had softened, turning the metal fence into a band of dull gold. A truck engine growled in the distance, slow, deliberate. I turned and saw a white SUV creeping along the fence line. The window rolled down. A man leaned out, clipboard in hand. "Afternoon," he said, voice thick with polite authority. "Donald Snipe, enforcement officer for Pinebrook Meadows." He looked like he'd been poured into his khakis, neat, pressed, not a speck of dust on his shoes. "You're on the wrong side of that fence, sir," I told him. He smiled, teeth perfect, eyes colder than the steel gate between us. "Just routine perimeter assessment. We've had complaints about unsightly equipment visible from community lots. You understand property values." I cut him off. "This land's not your community. Tell your boss to quit sending me letters before I start charging rent for all the photos you're taking." He made a note on his clipboard, unbothered. "We'll review it at the next board meeting." The SUV rolled away, leaving nothing but the echo of tires on gravel. I watched until the dust settled, then walked to the back of the property where the mesquite thinned. That's when I saw them. Small orange flags stuck in the dirt every few yards, each marked with a number. Surveyor markers. Fresh. I knelt, pulling one from the ground. The ink was still wet. They weren't just sending letters. They were mapping something. Night came slow, heavy with crickets. I sat on the porch, boots up, papers spread across the table, the letters fluttering in the warm wind like warnings. Somewhere beyond the fence, a coyote howled, long, low, and certain. I folded the letters again, slid them into a folder marked Evidence, and felt that same quiet fire spark in my gut. The first rule my father taught me about land disputes: never shout, never swing, just no more than the man trying to cheat you. Tomorrow, I'd start at the county clerk's office. If they wanted to play by the book, I'd bring the whole library. And as the porch light flickered over the fence line, I saw the faint glint of another flag in the dark, fluttering like a warning. "Those flags aren't random," I muttered. "They're a map of something bigger." Tomorrow came early. The air was sharp with cedar and the faint sweetness of rain that never quite made it to the ground. I left before sunrise, headlights cutting through the fog rolling off the hills. The road into town was quiet, the kind of quiet that lets you hear your own thoughts whether you want to or not. By the time I pulled into the Travis County Clerk's office, the sky had turned the color of old copper. Inside, fluorescent lights hummed over shelves of paper older than me. The smell of dust and toner filled the air. A clerk named Ray Delgado, a man with hair gone silver at the edges and coffee stains on his shirt, looked up from his desk when I stepped in. "Morning. Need help with records?" "Boundary and property surveys for the north side of Pinebrook Meadows," I said, setting my hat on the counter. He raised an eyebrow. "That new HOA giving you grief?" "Something like that." Ray's mouth twisted into a half smile. "You're not the first rancher to wander in here asking that question." He typed slow, keys clacking like a clock. "Let's see. Development plats filed by Whitfield Holdings, LLC. He glanced up. "Any relation to Bethany Whitfield?" "President of the HOA, I said. Ray whistled low. "Figures." He disappeared into the back, boots echoing on tile. When he returned, he carried a stack of manila folders heavy enough to choke a bull. Zoning, right-of-way, access easements. They filed a few modifications this month. "Want copies?" "All of them," he chuckled. "You planning a war or a wedding?" "Depends which one they started." An hour later, I sat at a corner table under a flickering light. Pages spread like a deck of marked cards. My fingers left smudges on the glossy maps. There it was, a shaded gray line curling around my entire property. A note at the bottom read, "Pinebrook Meadows Phase 4, Perimeter Boundary Enhancement, Approved." I traced the line with one finger. The fence wasn't a mistake. It was deliberate, drawn to loop around me like I was livestock. The small sliver where the gate sat had been carved from an older survey and reclassified as HOA property just 2 weeks earlier. That was their loophole. They hadn't touched my deed. They'd simply boxed it in. I leaned back in the hard wooden chair. Somewhere in the rafters, a vent rattled. "You ever see something like this before, Ray?" He scratched his chin. "You got yourself a mess of paperwork and a woman who knows how to use it. But let me tell you, paper cuts both ways. If they boxed you in, they might have boxed themselves out of county code." "How do I prove that?" He grinned. "You prove it the old way. You buy the land under the gate." That sentence hung in my head all the way home. The sun was low when I turned back onto my lane. The fence glinted like silver wire in the dusk. I parked by the gate and stared through it. My dog, Ranger, was sitting on the porch, tail flicking slow, head tilted as if asking why I didn't just cut the lock and drive through. Because this wasn't that kind of fight. I walked the perimeter until the crickets started up, following the fence line where my property met theirs. Fresh tire marks pressed into the dirt on the HOA side, wide treads, construction trucks. Someone had been here during the day. At the north corner, near the creek bed, a set of survey stakes formed a perfect square about 5 by 5 feet wide. And there, at the center, was the gatepost foundation, the one I'd noticed in the plats. A patch of scraped dirt showed where a shed used to stand. My pulse slowed. The coordinates matched the reclassified parcel on the map. They owned this tiny patch, the hinge of everything. I walked back to the truck and sat for a long time, watching the light fade over the ridge. The fence stood quiet and smug, a line drawn by people who'd never fixed a fence in their lives. I could almost hear Bethany's voice in those letters. Community harmony, aesthetic value, property alignment. Harmony, my foot. Headlights appeared down the road, a pair of beams slicing through the dusk. The white SUV again. It slowed near the fence, stopped, then idled with its lights on. Through the tint, I saw the outline of a man's head. Donald Snipe. He rolled the window down halfway. "Evening, Mr. Morrison. Just making sure construction stayed secure. can't have trespassers." "Funny," I said. "I was thinking the same thing." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "We'll have to coordinate gate access soon. New security protocols. You'll be hearing from the board." "Looking forward to it." He drove off, leaving the smell of diesel and arrogance behind. When I finally went inside, I spread the maps across my kitchen table. The overhead light buzzed, catching the edges of the pages like sunlight on water. Every line told the same story. They'd built a fence shaped like ownership, but hollow inside. I poured myself a cup of black coffee and stared at the tiny square under the gate until the letters blurred. Ray's words echoed, "You buy the land under the gate." By midnight, I'd found the old parcel ID online and the name of its owner, Ernest Walker, retired farmer, lived 2 counties over. I smiled for the first time that day. The crickets outside went quiet for a moment, like the world itself was holding its breath. Then the wind picked up, rustling through the fence line. It sounded less like defiance now, more like warning. I stood at the window, watching the glint of metal in the moonlight, and whispered to myself, "They fenced me in. Now I'll find the door." By morning, the plan had turned from a whisper into motion. I packed a thermos of coffee, printed the parcel record, and drove 2 hours west through fields the color of old brass. The road wound past empty feed stores and billboards half peeled by sun, the kind of country where time doesn't hurry for anyone. Ernest Walker lived on the edge of Burnett County, down a dirt lane lined with mesquite trees that looked older than the law itself. His farmhouse was small but stubborn, paint gone soft and gray, porch sagging under the weight of tools that had outlived their owners. He was sitting on that porch when I pulled up, thin, white-bearded, denim shirt bleached to pale blue, eyes sharp as barbed wire. A hound dozed at his boots. "Morning," I called, stepping out. "You Ernest Walker?" "Depends who's asking," he said, voice like gravel poured slow. "Name's Jake Morrison. I'm looking to buy a small strip of land you used to own out by Pine Brook Meadows. Says here you still hold title." I handed him the printed record. He took it, squinting without his glasses. "Well, I'll be. That's the old access lane the developer didn't want to pay taxes on. They offered me a check, but I told them I don't sell to people who smile too much." He looked up. "Why'd you want it?" "Because they built their gate on it," I said. His laugh cracked the morning quiet. "City folks always think lines on paper mean more than the dirt under their boots. How bad they mess with you. They fenced my ranch like it was part of their subdivision. Put up signs calling it Private HOA Property." "Hell," he muttered, shaking his head. "Well, that little patch ain't much. 5 by 5 and a sliver to the road. But it's mine. Or yours, if you want it. You pay the back taxes, I'll sign the deed this afternoon." We drove into town together, him in my passenger seat with a tin of tobacco balanced on his knee. At the clerk's office, Ray greeted us with that same easy grin. "Buying again already, Jake?" "Just evening the score." By lunchtime, the paperwork was done. The deed sat warm in my hand, still smelling of copier ink. Ernest gripped my shoulder on the courthouse steps. "You take care of that patch," he said. "Sometimes the smallest piece of land makes the biggest noise." When I got home, I parked by the fence and stared at that gate. The metal shimmered under the noon sun, padlock gleaming like a challenge. On the HOA side, the manicured lawns of Pine Brook Meadows stretched out neat and green. Kids rode bikes. Sprinklers ticked. No one had a clue what was coming. I walked the short path to the little maintenance shed sitting crooked behind the gate. The wood was old, sun-split, paint flaking like old bone. A rusted latch gave way under my hand. Inside, the air smelled of oil and dust. Rakes, paint cans, a cracked clipboard, and on a hook by the wall, a key tagged Gate Access, HOA only. I turned, it in my palm. It was warm from the heat inside the shed, heavy enough to feel like truth. That evening, I waited. Pinebrook Meadows was holding their big family picnic. Live music, food trucks, the works. The parking lot was lined with shiny SUVs and pastel umbrellas. I parked my old Dodge at the edge of my newly bought strip of land, stepped out with a wooden sign I'd stenciled the night before. Private property. No trespassing. Donald Snipe was the first to spot me. He stormed over, khaki pants spotless, HOA badge glinting. "Mr. Morrison, what do you think you're doing?" "Putting up a sign," I said, hammering it into the ground. "On my land." He blinked, confused. Your land? That's HOA access property." I pulled the folded deed from my pocket and handed it to him. His lips moved as he read. When he looked up, the color had drained from his face. "That's not possible," he said. "It's recorded, filed, and paid for. County stamp and all." Bethany Whitfield herself appeared behind him, sun hat, perfect, wine glass in hand. "Mr. Morrison," she began, voice smooth as honey hiding a nail. "There must be some misunderstanding. This area was incorporated under Pinebrook Meadows jurisdiction." "Not anymore," I said, slipping the key from my pocket and holding it up so the sun flashed off it. "You built your gate on my ground. This key belongs to me now." The crowd had started to gather. Kids stopped tossing footballs. Someone's Bluetooth speaker cut off mid-song. The only sound was the hammer echoing as I drove the sign flush into the dirt. Bethany's smile froze. "You're trespassing." "No," I said, fitting the key into the padlock. "I'm coming home." The lock turned with a metallic click that rang through the still air. I swung the gate open slow, wide enough for the dust to follow me as I walked through. Bethany stood rooted, mouth tight. Donald sputtered, clipboard trembling. I paused halfway through the gate, turned back and said, "Access restored, legally." Then I slid the key back into my pocket and shut the gate behind me. Ranger barked from the porch as I walked up the drive, sun sinking low behind me. The crickets were already tuning up, and for the first time in weeks, I felt something close to peace. But as the shadows stretched across the fields, a thought crept in like a draft under a door. Fences don't stop when the people behind them feel cornered. I poured myself a drink, leaned on the porch rail, and watched the lights from Pinebrook Meadows flicker in the distance. I had my key, my access, and the law on my side. For now, that would have to be enough. The next morning came with the sound of engines. Deep, heavy, mechanical. Not the whine of pickups or tractors. This was the growl of diesel moving dirt. I stepped out onto the porch, coffee in hand, and saw a cloud of dust rising beyond the north fence line. The rumble shook the ground faintly under my boots. Through the haze, shapes began to form. Bulldozers, dump trucks, and men in hard hats marking stakes with spray paint. A brand new sign stood in the gravel. Pinebrook Meadows, Future Access Road, Private HOA Use Only. I nearly dropped the mug. I crossed the yard, climbed into my truck, and rolled down the drive. When I reached the fence, the noise hit me like a wave. Grinding metal, clanking chains, the whir of machinery pushing through what used to be my quiet. A foreman with reflective sunglasses glanced up as I parked. "Can I help you, sir?" he called over the roar. "You sure can," I said. "You're on my boundary." He looked down at a clipboard. "According to our site map, this is authorized by county permit. HOA expansion project. All paperwork's in order. Let me see it." He hesitated, then handed over a laminated copy of a permit with the county seal embossed at the top. I scanned it fast. It looked official. Logo, signatures, approval stamp. But I knew the name scrawled at the bottom. Barry McDougall, County Zoning Inspector. Except I'd played cards with Barry every Thursday night at Miller's Diner for the last 5 years, and that wasn't his handwriting. I looked up. You mind telling me who gave you this? He frowned. Came straight from the HOA board. We're under strict order to start grading today. I folded the paper and tucked it into my pocket. You might want to shut those engines down until I make a call. He laughed, like I was an old man yelling at clouds. We're on schedule, sir. I can't stop without confirmation. Then let's get you some. I drove straight into town, gravel spitting under the tires. The county office was quieter than the machines chewing up my land. Barry sat at his desk, bolo tie hanging loose, sunflower seeds crunching between his teeth. Well, if it ain't Jake Morrison, he said. You look like a man who just found a snake in his mailbox. I might have, I said, dropping the permit in front of him. Tell me if this is yours. He picked it up, squinted. Then his brow furrowed. That's my name, but I sure as hell didn't sign it. Thought so. Barry set down his coffee, all traces of humor gone. They forged a county document. That's felony level stupid. Can you prove it? Easier than you think, he said, pulling open a drawer and producing a thick ledger. Every legitimate permit gets logged and numbered. This serial belongs to a drainage easement for the high school over in Marble Falls. Someone copied it. He looked up. You want me to come take a look? I was hoping you'd say that. By the time we got back, the noise had doubled. A black golf cart with a Pine Brook Meadows logo was parked near the machines. Donald Snipe stood beside it, clipboard in hand, hair slicked back like a man in charge. Barry's pickup kicked up a tail of dust as we rolled to a stop. He stepped out, badge glinting in the sun, and walked straight toward Donald. Afternoon, Barry said. Barry McDougal, county zoning. You boys got a permit to build this road? Donald's smile twitched. Of course we do. Signed authorization from your office. Funny, Barry said, taking the paper, because I just came from my office. And this, he tapped the signature, ain't mine. For a second, the sound of the engines seemed to fade. Donald shifted, trying to recover. It must be a clerical error. The board handles all documentation through our development consultant. Barry laughed, a dry, hard sound. Son, you just told a county inspector that the county forged itself. I suggest you shut these machines down before I start writing fines the size of your HOA dues. Donald's jaw worked, but he signaled the foreman. One by one, the machines went silent, engines coughing out their last growls. Dust drifted over the stillness like smoke. Barry turned to me. I'll file a report first thing. They'll need to answer to the commission for this. I nodded. Appreciate it. Donald stepped closer, lowering his voice. You're making a mistake, Morrison. You think you can win this, but you're poking a hornet's nest. We're not just some neighborhood committee. I met his stare. You're right. You're a bunch of people who forgot fences don't make you owners. He glared, then walked away, his golf cart sputtering back toward the manicured houses. As the sun dipped, Barry finished snapping photos. The metal of the half-built road gleamed red under the evening light. They'll be lucky if the county doesn't hit 'em with 5 figures in fines, he muttered. But I gotta tell you, Jake, people like this, they don't quit. They find another way. I know, I said quietly. That's what worries me. Later that night, I sat at the kitchen table. The fake permit spread open beside my coffee cup. Outside, the cicadas screamed like static. Ranger lay under the table, head on his paws, eyes half open. For a moment, I let myself think maybe it was over, that the road would stop, that the fence would stay quiet. Then I saw headlights flash across the far pasture. Slow, deliberate. They paused near the new gate, idled, then turned off. I stood there in the dark, watching the faint glow fade behind the fence, The machines had stopped. The road was silent. But something in that silence didn't feel finished. For 3 nights, Pinebrook Meadows stayed quiet. No construction crews, no golf carts, no HOA letters. Even the late-night headlights along the fence were gone. It was the kind of stillness you get right before a storm. Too neat, too calm, waiting for the first crack. On the 4th night, I was brushing down my mare in the barn when Ranger's bark shattered the quiet. It wasn't his "someone drove by" bark. It was deep, urgent, the kind that comes from the gut. I killed the lantern, stepped out into the moonlight, and listened. The air was thick with the smell of alfalfa and the faint hiss of wind through dry grass. Then I heard it. Metal clinking, a shovel striking dirt. I grabbed my flashlight and moved along the barn's back wall, slow, careful. The beam cut across the far pasture. 3 silhouettes crouched near the fence line, reflective strips on their vests catching the light. "Who's out there?" I called. They froze. One man dropped something metallic. It hit the ground with a hollow clang. Then came the sound of boots pounding away into the dark. When I reached the spot, the smell hit first. Gasoline. My stomach turned cold. A half-empty red jerry can sat by the fence, a rag stuffed in its mouth. Patches of soil shimmered wet under the beam. They'd poured it in wide arcs, just shy of the hay-shed wall. If Ranger hadn't barked when he did. I hauled the can back to the barn, heart beating too hard to count. The hay was dry as paper this time of year. One spark would have sent the whole roof up. I turned on the exterior lights and checked the security camera mounted over the door. The little red indicator blinked steady. Good. I'd get faces in the morning. By dawn, Sheriff McKay's cruiser was parked beside the corral. He stood with one boot on the fence rail, hat tipped back, coffee steaming in his hand. "They wanted your barn to burn," he said, watching the footage I'd queued up on the tablet. The screen showed 3 figures creeping along the fence, 2 carrying cans, one holding a lighter. The tallest turned once toward the camera, and even through the grainy night vision, his face was clear enough. Donald Snipe. McKay blew out a slow breath. "Well, that's not neighborly." "You gonna bring him in?" I asked. "Not yet," he said. "I'll start the paperwork, but we'll need more than a blurry face before the DA takes a swing at an HOA board member. Keep your copies, lock everything, and Jake, don't go cowboy on me." I smiled without humor. "You know me, Sheriff. I prefer paperwork." But the truth was, anger burned hotter than any match they'd tried to strike. That afternoon, I drove into town and printed stills from the footage, 3 clean frames of the trespassers mid-stride. I pinned them to the corkboard in my workshop under a note written in thick marker. "Try again. I don't miss." That night, the air carried the faint smell of rain, but none of the promise. Every sound made Ranger's ears twitch. Around midnight, a drone buzzed overhead, white, blinking lights hovering just long enough to feel personal. I pulled out my slingshot, loaded a small steel bearing, and let it fly. The drone spiraled down into the weeds with a sharp, metallic whine. The next morning, I took its cracked shell and set it on the fence post facing Pinebrook Meadows, like a warning nailed to a door. By midday, I had visitors. 2 men in navy polos with the HOA logo arrived in a black golf cart. They stopped just outside the gate. One wore aviators, the other carried a clipboard. "You'll need to remove that debris from HOA property," aviators said. "Debris?" I nodded at the drone. "You mean your surveillance toy?" He stiffened. "This development maintains airspace safety monitoring." "Funny, it crashed right after it crossed my property line," I said. "County's got a copy of the footage. Maybe they'll enjoy the show." They drove off without another word, but I could feel their eyes on me the whole way down the road. That evening, I made a call to Barry McDougal. "Barry, you still got those inspection photos from the road site?" "Sure do," he said. "Why?" "I've got new proof the HOA's been operating outside their permits. Think you could swing by tomorrow?" He showed up just before noon, dusty blue pickup idling at the edge of my drive. I handed him the drone's memory card and the photos from the security cam. His brow furrowed deeper with every image. "Sweet mercy," he said finally. "They're doubling down. I'll file this under unlawful land interference. County'll have to investigate." "Do that," I said. "And Barry, lock your doors." He grinned. "This ain't my first rodeo, Jake, but I'll keep my boots by the bed." After he left, I sat on the porch with a notepad and started writing. Every event, every letter, every photo, dates, times, witnesses. I wasn't just building a defense anymore. I was building a case. The wind picked up around sunset, carrying the faint metallic smell of that burned gasoline I'd washed off the dirt. Somewhere beyond the trees, a storm was rumbling, low and slow. As the first lightning flashed on the horizon, I looked at the gate shining under the rain and whispered, "They think they're turning up the heat. They don't know fire's what forged this land in the first place." That storm rolled in slow, one of those Texas tempests that makes the ground shudder before the rain ever hits. Thunder crawled along the clouds, and the first drops came like spit from the sky, hard, heavy, defiant. I sat on the porch with Ranger beside me, watching the wind bend the trees until they looked like they were bowing to something bigger. The rain washed the gasoline smell from the earth, but not from my mind. Each drop felt like punctuation in a sentence I hadn't finished yet. I knew Pinebrook Meadows wasn't done, not by a long shot. They'd failed to burn me out, so the next move would be quieter, cleaner, paper instead of fire. And I was right. 2 mornings later, I got a letter in a glossy white envelope slipped under the gate. No stamp, no postmark. Just one name in small, perfect print. Bethany Whitfield. I opened it at the kitchen table, half expecting another threat disguised as politeness. But this time it wasn't a warning. It was an invitation. "Mr. Morrison, in light of recent misunderstandings, Pinebrook Meadows would like to meet and discuss an amicable resolution. Please join us at the HOA Clubhouse this Thursday at 6 p.m. Bethany Whitfield, President." I read it twice. "Amicable resolution," I muttered. That was HOA language for trap. Still, I went. The clubhouse sat at the end of a curving drive lined with solar lamps and manicured shrubs, every blade of grass trimmed to regulation length. I parked by the curb and walked up the steps. Inside, the air was cold, scented with lemon cleaner and control. Bethany was waiting at a long table with Donald Snipe and a few other board members, all dressed like they'd come straight from a corporate conference call. Bethany smiled that politician's smile, the one that never reached her eyes. "Mr. Morrison," she said, "we appreciate you taking the time." "Didn't have much choice, did I?" Donald cleared his throat. "We're here to make peace. There's been tension between your property and our community. The board feels that cooperation might serve everyone better." I leaned on the back of the chair across from them. Cooperation's easy when folks mind their boundaries. Bethany folded her hands. "Boundaries can be fluid, Mr. Morrison. Communities evolve. Land deeds don't," I said. Her smile flickered. "You may find that our legal counsel interprets those lines differently." That's when the door opened behind me. A woman stepped in, early 40s, dark hair pulled into a low bun, eyes tired but sharp. She wore a raincoat over a suit and carried a leather briefcase. Bethany straightened. "Ah, this is our attorney, Ms. Sarah Coleman." Sarah gave a curt nod but didn't meet Bethany's eyes. She sat down at the far end of the table, flipping open a folder. The meeting lasted 40 minutes. They threw everything at me. Proposed easements, maintenance fees, offers to absorb my land into their HOA for protection. I listened, said little, and when they finished, I stood up. You folks want peace? I said. Then quit pretending you own what you don't. You built a fence on a lie. And I've got proof of every inch. Bethany's jaw tightened. Be careful, Mr. Morrison. Words like that can cost you. I smiled, slow. So can fences. I left before they could respond. The rain had started again, thin and steady, and I could see my reflection warped in the puddles on the pavement. 3 nights later, someone knocked on my door. It was late. Too late for neighbors. Too late for anything good. I grabbed my flashlight and opened it to find Sarah Coleman standing on the porch, soaked through, hair plastered to her face. Ms. Coleman? She looked over her shoulder like she expected someone to be there, then stepped inside. I didn't know where else to go, she said. Her voice shook, but her eyes were steady. You were right. About all of it. She reached into her coat and pulled out a flash drive, wrapped in a damp paper napkin. What's this? I asked. Everything, she said. Emails, memos, financial reports. They planned all of it. The fence, the forged permit, even the fire. Bethany signed off on every action. She called it a containment strategy. Donald executed it. I just stared at her. The storm outside cracked like a whip. Why tell me now? She hesitated. Because they're planning something worse. They've been drafting a motion to rezone your property as internal green space. If it passes the county review board, you'll lose control of the land even if you keep the deed. My pulse thudded in my ears. That's illegal. She nodded. So is half of what they've already done. But they've got money and friends in zoning. You need to act before they file it. I took the flash drive. This enough to stop them? If you show it to the right people, yes. But be careful. They'll know it came from me. A gust of wind slammed the shutters, making her flinch. I poured her coffee and let her warm her hands around the cup. You sure you want to do this? I asked. I'm done helping them hurt people, she said softly. You're the only one who stood up to them. By morning, she was gone. She'd left before sunrise, leaving only her empty mug by the sink and a note under it. Good luck, Jake. Don't let them fence the truth. I stared out at the ranch as the first light crawled across the fields. The storm clouds had cleared, but everything smelled fresh, raw, alive. The flash drive sat on the table, tiny and weightless, but heavy with everything that mattered. I picked it up, slipped it into my pocket, and whispered to myself, let's see how they handle a fence made of facts. 2 days later, I was standing in the county courthouse, hat in my hand, boots tracking dust across the marble floor. The air smelled of paper, coffee, and nerves. Outside, Pinebrook Meadows' board had gathered like crows around a shiny thing. Suits pressed, whispers clipped, faces drawn tight with worry disguised as confidence. Sarah's flash drive had cracked their shell. Barry McDougal confirmed the forged permit. The sheriff logged the arson attempt, and now the district court was ready to hear both sides. It wasn't just about a fence anymore. It was about everything that fence stood for. Judge Ramirez presided, a woman known around Travis County for 2 things, her love of black coffee and her hatred of liars. She looked over her reading glasses as we entered. Case of Morrison versus Pinebrook Meadows HOA, she said. Both parties present? Donald Snipe rose first, all swagger and starch. Yes, Your Honor. Representing the board, with counsel from Whitfield Holdings. Then I stood. Jake Morrison, representing myself and my property. The judge nodded once. Let's keep this civil, folks. The law will decide what the dirt can't. The first hour was nothing but paperwork and posturing. Donald's attorney, a man named Kessler with a tie worth more than my truck, argued that the fence was an essential boundary for community protection. He waved glossy photos of the development, kids playing, gardens blooming, like a sales pitch for paradise. When it was my turn, I didn't bother with theatrics. I set the flash drive on the table, slid it toward the clerk, and said, "This holds emails, financial records, and internal memos showing Pinebrook Meadows knowingly forged county documents, built across a legal boundary, and tried to rezone private land without consent." Kessler scoffed. "Your Honor, this so-called evidence was obtained illegally by a disgruntled former employee." Judge Ramirez raised a hand. "We'll see about that once we review the chain of custody." The clerk plugged the drive into a laptop, and the projector flickered to life. The first email appeared on screen, dated 6 months back. "Donald, proceed with the enclosure plan. Public notice optional. HOA jurisdiction can be argued later. If Morrison resists, we have the fire claim to leverage. BW." A murmur rolled through the courtroom. Donald's jaw tightened. Bethany's eyes never left the table. The next file was a photo, the very permit they'd shown the construction crew, layered over a scan of the real one. The signatures didn't just differ. One was flipped from a scanned copy. Barry's testimony confirmed it. "That's mine," he said, pointing at the real one. "The other's a forgery." Sheriff McKay followed, recounting the night of the attempted arson. "We found traces of accelerant on the Morrison property. Security footage caught 2 men, one matching Mr. Snipe's build and posture. County forensics confirmed it." Donald went pale. When the judge turned to Bethany, she sat perfectly still. "Mrs. Whitfield, do you wish to respond?" Bethany looked up, voice calm but trembling beneath the surface. "Your Honor, everything we did was for the safety and harmony of our residents. Mr. Morrison's property posed risks, blight, liability." Judge Ramirez cut her off. "You mean it didn't fit your aesthetic?" Silence. Then the judge turned to me. "Mr. Morrison, anything further?" I stood, hands steady on the rail. "Your Honor, I'm not a man who enjoys standing in rooms like this. I'd rather mend fences than argue them. But my father taught me something about land. It's not about fences or lawns or who has the fancier mailbox. It's about keeping your word. These folks broke theirs before they ever met me." For a long moment, the only sound was the rain hitting the courthouse windows. Judge Ramirez leaned back, tapping her pen against the desk. "I've seen boundary disputes, but this is an organized effort to strong-arm a man off his lawful property." She glanced toward the HOA table. "And I don't take kindly to that." Her gavel came down hard. "The court rules in favor of Mr. Morrison. Pinebrook Meadows is ordered to remove all fencing and pay $500,000 in damages for unlawful enclosure, document forgery, and attempted property seizure. Further investigation will be referred to the county prosecutor." The sound that followed wasn't applause, but relief. A long exhale that filled the room like air after a storm. Bethany's face crumbled into shock. Donald sank into his chair. The sheriff stepped forward quietly, hand resting near his badge, as deputies escorted the 2 of them out the side door. The camera crews outside would get their story soon enough. I turned toward Sarah, who'd slipped in at the back of the courtroom. She gave me a nod. No smile, just quiet acknowledgement. The kind that said, "We did it right." When the hearing ended, I walked out into the drizzle. The courthouse steps gleamed wet, reflecting the lights of the parked news vans lining the curb. I paused halfway down, breathing in the smell of wet pavement and diesel. Justice doesn't make noise, not the kind that lasts. It moves quiet, steady, like a river carving stone. I put my hat back on, adjusted the brim, and looked toward the horizon where my ranch sat waiting. The fence might still stand for a few more days, but the law had already torn it down. By the time I got home that evening, the sky had gone from gray to gold, the kind of light that feels like the end of a long war. Ranger bounded out to meet me, tail thumping against my leg. The barn was safe, the cattle calm, the gate still swinging in the breeze. For the first time in months, the place felt like mine again. Still, peace and victory never come easy in Texas. A week after the court ruling, I got a call from the county office. The HOA's assets were frozen pending investigation, their offices shuttered. But there was something interesting buried in the property logs. A small strip of land, 6 feet wide and 60 yards long, running directly under Pine Brook Meadows' main driveway. The same kind of forgotten parcel Ernest Walker once sold me. I drove straight to the records department. The clerk looked up as I walked in, recognized me from the headlines, and smiled like a man handing over a secret. "Mr. Morrison," he said, sliding the file across the counter. "That strip used to belong to the original landowner before the development. HOA never secured title. It's still listed under a dormant holding company." "How dormant?" He shrugged. "Taxes unpaid? Technically, it's for sale." An hour later, it wasn't. That evening, I stood in front of the Pine Brook Meadows clubhouse, papers in one hand, a wooden sign in the other. The air was crisp, still wet from a passing rain. Crickets chirped across the manicured lawns. Porch lights glowed behind identical windows. I hammered the sign into the gravel right in the middle of their driveway. "Private property. Cross at your own risk." The thud of each hammer strike echoed through the quiet like a verdict. It didn't take long for company to show up. Donald Snipe wasn't in handcuffs anymore, but he looked smaller somehow. Jacket wrinkled, face pale, eyes darting. He stormed down the walkway, waving a piece of paper. "You can't do this!" he barked. "You're blocking HOA access." I turned slowly, leaning on the handle of the hammer. "Access? To land you don't own?" He thrust the paper at me. "We have a temporary injunction while our appeal's under review." I unfolded it. County seal, but no judge's signature. Just a stamped header and a lot of wishful thinking. "Nice try," I said, handing it back. "You might want to get this one notarized before waving it around." He sputtered. You're endangering residents. You can't cut off the entrance." "Funny," I said. "You fenced mine off first." His voice cracked. "This isn't over, Morrison." "I sure hope not," I said, tipping my hat. "Because it's starting to get fun." The next morning, the sign made the news. A passing reporter caught footage of it. Bold black letters against the HOA's polished brick sign. A symbol of reversal too poetic to ignore. The headline read, "The Rancher Who Bought the Road." That clip went viral, faster than a prairie fire. Comments poured in from across the country. Farmers, veterans, homeowners, folks who'd had their own run-ins with HOAs that forgot the meaning of property lines. People stopped me in town to shake my hand. Strangers mailed letters of support, and one man even sent a hand-carved plaque that read, "Good fences make good neighbors. Great deeds make free men." Still, not everyone was celebrating. Bethany Whitfield resurfaced on local radio 2 days later, claiming she'd been misrepresented by the media and that Pine Brook Meadows was the true victim of legal overreach. Her voice sounded brittle, all polish and no steel. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Instead, I spent that week walking the boundary lines again. The air smelled of cedar and soil, the kind of smell that tells you the land remembers every fight it's survived. Each step felt lighter than the last. At sunset, I drove my truck down the HOA road, the one that crossed my new strip of land, and parked at the clubhouse entrance. The place was nearly empty now. The board had resigned, Most residents kept to themselves. Only a handful of lights glowed in the windows. I stepped out, boots crunching on wet gravel, and looked at the row of houses beyond. Perfect lawns, silent driveways, and the faint hum of air conditioners. It was strange. A whole neighborhood that looked alive but felt hollow. I smiled to myself. Funny thing about control, I said quietly. It never lasts. The wind carried the words down the road, bouncing them off their pristine fences and painted mailboxes until they sounded like laughter. Back at the ranch, I sat on the porch as twilight settled over the hills. The gate creaked in the wind, a sound that once meant confinement, but now sounded like freedom itself. Ranger lay at my feet, tail flicking against the wood. Across the field, fireflies blinked over the grass like sparks from a forge. I thought about all the months I'd spent fighting, not just for the land, but for what it meant. The right to stand on soil that carried your name. The right to be left alone. Somewhere behind the hills, thunder rolled again, distant and low. Not a threat this time, a reminder. Freedom, like storms, doesn't come once. It keeps returning, reshaping the horizon. And tonight, the horizon was mine again. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the ranch windows like liquid gold. The world smelled of wet dirt and second chances. I poured a cup of coffee, leaned against the sink, and looked out toward the open field where the fence once stood. The ground was uneven, scarred where the posts had been ripped out by court order, but it was beautiful. A scar that had healed on its own terms. A week later, the county crew came to haul away what was left of the steel. I watched from the porch as they stacked the panels, each one a ghost of how far the HOA had gone and how much further I'd come back. When the last post clanged onto the flatbed, the foreman tipped his hat. "Guess that's the end of it," he said. "Maybe," I replied. "Or maybe it's just the start." Because I already had an idea. It came from something Ernest Walker had said that day on the courthouse steps. Sometimes the smallest piece of land makes the biggest noise. The strip I'd bought beneath the HOA's driveway had made its point loud enough. But now I had a bigger plan. Not for revenge, but for legacy. Within 2 months, the ranch looked different. The field by the gate was alive with movement, posts being set, lumber hauled, banners printed. Old friends from my firefighting days showed up with tool belts and trailers. Kids from town came after school to help haul gravel. Even Barry McDougal traded his clipboard for a hammer. By early summer, the new archway stood tall, welded from reclaimed steel and painted red, white, and blue. Across the top, in bold letters that caught the sun, it read, "Freedom Arena." The first rodeo was a small one, maybe 50 people, folding chairs, and the smell of barbecue drifting across the field. But it felt bigger than any stadium. Veterans from nearby towns gathered under the oak trees, laughing, telling stories. Kids chased goats in the pen while parents clapped and cheered. Sheriff McKay brought his band, a handful of locals with guitars and harmonicas who played old country tunes until the sun bled into the hills. Standing at the gate, I watched as folks from Pinebrook Meadows began to appear along the fence line, hesitant, curious. Some brought lawn chairs. Others just stood with their kids on their shoulders, watching as laughter replaced silence. One woman, a young mother I'd seen walking her dog before, waved. "Mind if we come in?" she called. I grinned. "Gates open?" They came. Dozens of them. Homeowners who'd once voted for that fence now sat on hay bales eating ribs beside the very man they'd tried to fence out. The music swelled, the arena lights came on, and the place pulsed with something stronger than victory. Belonging. By nightfall, even the air seemed to hum. The kids' laughter mixed with the low twang of a steel guitar. Sarah Coleman showed up, dressed down in jeans and boots, hair loose for once. She stood beside me near the ring, her voice almost lost in the noise. "You did it," she said. I shook my head. "We did it." "You ever think you'd turn a lawsuit into a rodeo?" I chuckled. "Didn't plan to. Just seemed like the right kind of fence to build." She smiled at that, eyes soft in the glow of the arena lights. When the last horse cleared the gate and the music faded, the crowd began to drift toward their cars, headlights cutting slow paths through the dust. I stood by the fence a while longer, listening to the creak of the wooden rails cooling in the night air. Across the road, the Pinebrook Meadows sign gleamed under the moon, the fancy logo now dull from months of rain. The old HOA office had been sold. The new president was a quiet woman named Emily, who'd written me a letter of apology. She'd even stopped by last week, hands trembling as she gave me a folded note. "Dear Mr. Morrison, thank you for reminding us what community truly means. Your arena brought laughter back to a place that forgot how to breathe. We hope you'll join our next town gathering, as a neighbor, not an opponent." I kept that letter tucked inside the ledger where my father's deed still lived. As the arena lights dimmed, Ranger wandered up beside me, tail sweeping the dust. I crouched, scratching behind his ears. "We did all right, boy," I whispered. "They built a fence and we built a place." In the distance, the wind shifted, a soft, steady breath moving across the open land, the same land that had been taken, fought for, and finally freed. When I looked out over the horizon, the stars had come out clear and unbothered, scattered like dust over heaven's own pasture. The gate creaked behind me, open now for good. I smiled, took one last look at the glowing sign over the arch, and said to the night, "They fenced me in once, but the land always finds a way out." If you've ever stood your ground for what's right, drop a simple yes in the comments, or just say where you're watching from. Out here, justice doesn't come easy, but it always finds the folks who don't back down. Stick around and subscribe if you believe every man and woman deserves to keep what they've built. I've got more true grit HOA and ranch justice stories coming your way.